Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. I'm enjoying these podcasts so much at the moment. Funny. I don't know why. I think I just like talking. I think that's my issue. I just enjoy talking. That's one of the reasons I've also, I run the Languages of London meetup events as well. And when I go to conferences, I just like talking. Maybe that's why I like languages in the first place. I don't know. Anyway, pleased to be with you virtually in your earbuds, wherever you are in the world. I'm also just about to go to Japan. I'm taking a 3-week holiday in Japan, and I have never been as excited in my life because I love Japan. It's my favourite country in the world. It's probably my favourite language. But I haven't been back since I left in 2012. And so, that's a long time to be away from a country that you really love. What is that? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh man, it's almost 6 years, 5.5, 6 years. No, hang on. No, it's exactly 5 years. So, I'm renting a car. I'm driving around Shikoku, Hiroshima, and the southern part of Honshu. And, I just really, really looking forward to it. Getting to speak lots of Japanese as well. It's funny, one of the issues and the difficulties of speaking a few languages is that inevitably, depending on your life situation, languages are going to mean more or less to you over time. And we have this discussion a lot in the Fluency Mastermind Facebook group about how to keep up languages, and often people say, look, this language just doesn't feature so much in my life at the moment, and you're just gonna have to go with it. Japanese for me, as much as I love it, it hasn't really improved for me much in the last 4 or 5 years. Ironically, I've actually got more confidence speaking Japanese, and I think that's because when I was in Japan, I was always comparing myself to Japanese people, so obviously I was always found wanting. But then when I went back to the UK and I started using it with Japanese people that I would meet around the place, I would realize how much they would appreciate the fact that I could speak with them in Japanese, and that gave me a lot more confidence because I could use it just purely for pleasure. So my confidence, ironically, actually soared in Japanese once I left Japan. But I think my level as such is not really what it used to be. So I often feel a bit sad that I don't keep it up. And sometimes I go through little kind of mini missions, as Benny would say, mini missions where I kind of try to just spend a bit more time speaking Japanese, but it's often forced, unfortunately, in my case. Anyway, you don't want to hear about that. All right, then. Today's question comes from Owen. Let's get into it.
Hi, Ollie. Owen here from the south of England. I continue to enjoy your podcasts, and I have a question which, as far as I know, hasn't been covered. I have a language that I'm actively working on at the moment, which is Polish. Thanks to you, I'm managing to keep it to one that I'm working on. But I'm also trying to maintain my existing languages, which are German, Spanish, and Welsh, by exposure whenever possible. And this might be the odd Spanish conversation at work, might mean reading books or websites, and listening to podcasts, often when I'm doing other things at the same time, such as commuting or doing housework, cooking, etc. The trouble is, I often realise I'm not really listening, especially in German, which is the weakest of the three. And this also happens to me when I'm listening to podcasts in my native language, English, and it reflects my general level of distractibility. I know I'm not unique in this. So my question is about the value of passive, unfocused listening in times that are not available for more serious use. Do you think it's worth carrying on playing the podcasts anyway, or should I leave it and save them for when I can really focus? I'd be interested to know your opinion on this. Thank you for all your work. Cheers.
Hey, Owen, thank you very much for your question, and apologies also for slightly mispronouncing your name before I introduced you there. I hope I've got it right this time. Thank you for the thanks, for the feedback as well. I really appreciate that. It's always great to hear, especially from people who have been listening to the podcast for a while and leave a question for the first time. So great to meet you virtually. And yeah, so passive listening, we have touched on this quite a few times, but not in the way that you've have put the question. So thanks for that. Let me start with my basic positioning on passive listening, which is which is this. If you are still in the kind of learning stage, so you don't confidently manipulate the language, you don't easily understand what's going on, you're very much a learner, then there is very limited value in this kind of extensive passive listening in the way that you describe. Or so, for example, you're doing the cooking and you've got a podcast playing in the background. Now, we could get into debates about whether or not this is the case, but I think most people would recognize the fact that if they're focusing on something else and they've just got something on in the background, they could quite easily spend an hour or two listening to something and then, get to the end of it, look back on it and say, I've got no idea what I was just listening to. And this is an experience that everybody can attest to. Now, this is not to say that you shouldn't spend time listening. It's very, very different from sitting and doing focused listening. So we at this point we can get into a discussion of level. We could say, well, if you listen to stuff that is more appropriate for your level, you might take in more. And other people might say, well, no, you can definitely learn a lot from listening to native level content. On this video I made recently about on immersion, which I was talking about, which has got a lot of sort of airtime on YouTube, people were coming in and saying, no, I know plenty of people who have just listened to 10,000 hours of Japanese and become fluent in it and all of that stuff. There are always exceptions to every rule, but there is a world of difference between the kind of listening where you're sat down and you're focused and you're paying attention in a quiet, concentrated environment, and just having something in the background. The reason that some people will learn to speak fluently just from listening, or claim they do at least, and others will totally fail to do so, saying they've learned nothing and not improved the slightest. Those people could be listening to exactly the same content, but what makes the difference is the extent to which you're able to pay attention and notice features of language. And this thing here, noticing, is the key. In literature on second language acquisition, the concept of noticing is absolutely huge, and it is the idea that we don't, if we're learning grammar, for example, you don't learn grammar by being taught the rules for the grammar. You learn grammar by simply paying attention to the language that is used and noticing different features, noticing when the past tense is used or what variety of the past tense is used. Noticing is huge. And the problem with having stuff just vaguely on in the background as a bit of company, a bit of extra exposure, is that we're generally not able to concentrate enough to notice what's going on in that environment, because we're simply not paying enough attention. But the question in this case is a little bit different, because what's being asked here is not, is extensive listening a good thing? Because then we can have a discussion about the best way to listen. In Owen's case, and this is something that I relate to very much, and I know many people listening will be able to relate to, is that he has lots of languages to maintain and only so many hours in the day. And so, in a busy life where you've got a million other things to be doing, what's the value in having something playing in German in the background? Now, I think I take a more philosophical approach to this, to be honest, Owen, which is that, what are languages for? What is the purpose of learning multiple languages? And for all of us who do learn many languages, it is to enrich our lives in ways that change and adapt over time. I first learned Japanese because I fell in love with the country. I moved to Japan. And no one could have stopped me learning Japanese at that point. 5 years on, and it features Japanese has no part in my life, the language, the country, the culture. And so does that mean that, so what's the purpose of Japanese now for me? I think it's the reality, I think, that you can't always be treating all of your languages like as a main focus. And so for me, philosophically, the key here really is just to try to find ways that you can make these languages meaningful in your life. So in the case of German, I would take it from what you've said that you're not focusing on German at the moment, and nor do you intend to. And that's absolutely fine. You've got other things that you're working on your Polish. You've got lots of other languages and sure lots of other hobbies and interests as well. And so you're at the end of the day, when all's said and done, you're left with this question of, well, what's my German for? And if it's not to work on and to diligently improve as quickly as you can as a focus, then the answer is, well, it's to enrich my life in whatever way I see fit. So I think in that sense, to spend time listening to content in German is absolutely fine, because it's your life. It's the German is narrating your life. It's coloring your life in different ways. So I think this comes back to the question of, what am I most interested in? What are you most interested in? Because you're not going to get a huge amount from all this listening in the background whilst you're cooking, to German. But to maximize your chances of that, you can at least align your listening with your interests. So, for example, if you like German music, if you like German opera, then you can be playing German opera in the background. And then what you're doing is you're strengthening the emotional connection to the language through music. I mean, I listen to a lot of Italian. I mean, I love opera. And so I listen to Italian opera all the time. And even though my Italian's lost to all intents and purposes, I'm still sort of forming that connection, and it's meaningful, irrespective of my level in Italian. It's meaningful and enjoyable for me. So I enjoy and therefore I do it. In the case of German, do you like German literature? In which case, could you put on audiobooks of German in the background? I think to the extent that you can listen to things that are meaningful to you and match your interests, you can make it as productive as it can be. All right, it might not be productive in the same sense as really focusing on a language and trying to raise your level. But, there's more to life. And as I was writing just the other day to somebody, I forget who it was, when you're learning a new language, you're always focusing on the language itself as the objective, as the kind of end game. But as soon as you actually have that language and you dominate that language, you realize that was never the end game at all. The whole purpose of learning that language was actually to open up new avenues in your life, to meet new people, to explore new cultures. That's what it's all about. It's not really about the language. So I think it's important to remember that, and to try to be as kind to yourself and as and as honest with yourself personally as you can be, and not to always feel this pressure from yourself, in comparison to your other languages, or from anyone else, for that matter. The more you can do that, the better, I think. So I hope that was helpful. Give you some food for thought, at least. I would send you to the show notes, but I mean, in case anyone's noticed, we're kind of in the middle of redesigning the website at the moment, and it's taking a bit longer than we thought. So for that reason, we haven't been updating the show note pages. So if you go to the show notes at the moment, it's just kind of an empty shell until we get the new website up and running, which should be any day now. But if you would like to leave a comment on this, either on the empty shell as it currently is, or else in a few weeks' time when we've updated and added show notes to all of this stuff, then you can. And this will be at iwillteachyoualanguage.com episode 245. If you'd like to ask me a question, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. It's really great when people leave questions, so please do. If you're one of these people like Owen, who's been listening for a long time but has yet to introduce themselves on the airwaves, then please do go ahead. I'd love to hear from you. So at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. Bit of further listening for you today. Back in episode 135, I answered the question from Anna, which was, what inspired you to learn so many languages? And this is relevant and timely to today's episode, because I think I talk a little bit about the why behind language learning and what it means for us in our broader lives. So if you'd like to go back and check that out, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 135. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Owen, for your question, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way, through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit.
That's PODKIT to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.